Well, hi folks, welcome to today's podcast, another edition of our My Life with Robert Burns. You've watched it before, you'll know that I'm here with Jim Thompson, my friend and colleague from Newcombe Burns Club. Hi Jim.
Hi Douglas, hi everybody.
For this episode, we've continued with our transatlantic travels, and we talked today to the USA Director of the Robert Burns World Federation. To tell us about his life with Robert Burns, please welcome Leslie Strachan.
Good morning, Douglas. How are you? And Jim, yourself, I hope you're both well. I'm here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, or just a wee bit past, so I haven't had all my coffee in me yet. But anyway, nice to meet you and glad to be here. And you, Les. Thanks for agreeing to be a guest on our My Life with Robert Burns podcast. I was going to say, how are you today? But then I thought you might break into a song about the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. You know, you can't say Blue Ridge. Anytime I'm back in Scotland, I tell people I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. They immediately want to sing along, you know. So it's a lovely part of the country, and it's a beautiful autumn or fall, as we call it over here. So we're blessed to be living here. Yeah, I can imagine that the trees will be picturesque with all the colours at this time of year. Yeah. Anyway, let's get started. For those that don't know you, Les, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Aye. Well, I was born in 1951 in Kilmarnock, hard by the Kilmarnock Water down in Fairy Hill Road. Grew up there in the 50s, went to Kilmarnock Grammar School, and scraped by the skin of my teeth into the James Hamilton. I don't know how, and did 2.5, 3 years at the James Hamilton, and I left school at 15. My father was an electrician by trade and wanted me to go into the trade, and I had no interest in it. I wasn't very bright in school at all, and so the services were calling me, and I would have gone into the Navy at 15, but they wouldn't have me until I was 16. So I said, damn it, I've got to get out of here. And so anyway, the Army took me at 15 and a half. I went in as a boy soldier and served in the Army for almost 7 years. And I got out. When I got out of the Army, I came to America, and that's probably the reason I got out of the Army, is that I had met my future wife, an American girl, while I was in Germany in my last postings, and decided to come up. Once I got out, I said, I'll come over for a wee holiday, you know, and came over for a holiday and got married 6 months later. So, yeah, you know, it was the right thing for me to do. I mean, I was not a clever boy in school. You know, I was a popular boy in school. I was one of the boys that the teacher said, oh, yeah, he's got good general knowledge, doesn't he apply himself? And so, you know, I realized fairly quickly that, you know, I wasn't going to continue on with my education. However, the Army decided I was going to continue on with my education. And as you go in as a boy soldier, half your day is education, the other half is military training and so forth. So they bring you up to a certain level and stuff. And within a year or so of being in the Army, I woke up, so as to speak. So anyway, I was a good soldier. I was kind of fast tracking and would have made a career out of it. And as I say, I met my wife and I had no intentions of being married in the services. So that's when I decided to get out and come off to America. Very good. How long were you in the Army? Just going on 7 years. Yeah. 7 years. I was 2.5 years almost, well, two full years and a bit as a boy soldier. And when I joined my parent regiment, I was out in the Far East when I turned 18. I was in Hong Kong when I had my 18th birthday. You can well imagine. But, you know, and it's funny enough why I ended up in Hong Kong. One of the few regrets is that I never joined a Scottish regiment. I was in the Armoured Corps, and there were only 2 Scottish armoured regiments. One was the Royal Scots Greys, another one with the 4th Tanks. And, you know, both of them were stuck out in Germany for the next 8 years. And I said, I'm never going to see the world if I go there. So I ended up joining a Birmingham regiment called the Queen's Own Hussars. And the only reason I did that is because they were in Hong Kong and Malaya. And so I got to see a bit of the world before I ended up back in Germany.
Very good. And what did you do after the army?
Well, that was the good thing, you know, or the strange thing. Came out here to America. Of course, I had no marketable skills at all. You know, there wasn't much demand for tank commanders in America. So I just kind of applied. I started out building houses, you know. I said, oh, that's right. I took woodwork in school. I can be a carpenter. I can be a joiner. So I went and applied for a job. This was that my wife was at university down in Tallahassee, down in Florida, and I went down there, and so I went out this day to this building site for a job, and the guy says, "What can you do?" I said, "Oh, you know, woodwork, carpentry skills, and all that." So they hired me on. So anyway, I started out as that for about a year or so, and moved up here to Virginia, and then I decided, well, I probably need to get a bit more education, so I went to college over here for a few years to get up to speed, and went into sales. You know, it's a kind of natural progression for a lot of Scottish people. If you've got an accent over here, people tend to like it. They may not understand you, but they like it anyway, and they tend to remember you. And so anyway, I started out in sales, and pretty much stayed in sales for the next 25, 30 odd years until about 25 years ago, my wife and I kind of looked at each other and said, you know, well, why are we doing this? We don't have to be working this hard. And we kind of went into business for ourselves. And we've always had an antique business, and used to go back and forth to Scotland once or twice a year, buying up antiques and bringing them back and selling them here. And we also developed a line of jewellery that we still have. We still have a wee website for that and so forth. So yeah, I feel like I'm retired, you know, I'm almost 70, but I still work every day. I mean, I can't play golf like Ronnie O'Byrne every day, you know. I take a bit of time to do some work. And so anyway, you know, just keep our hand in and stuff. It's all good.
And you mentioned your wife a few times. You want to give her a mention by name?
Sure, Nancy, yeah, lovely girl. I met her when I was in Germany. I was at that time I was teaching skiing for the British Army down in Bavaria. At both winters down there, they sent me off for 3-4 months at a time as a ski instructor, and she was a wee American girl doing what they did back in those days, bumming around Europe, you know, living on next to nothing. Anyway, she was looking to learn how to ski, and a friend of mine who ran this wee guest house said, "Oh, I know these British soldiers, they'll teach you to ski." And so he says, "Leslie, I've got this American girl once." I said, "Say no more. bring her on." So anyway, we were there for about 3 or 4 months, and I never did teach her to ski, but I got a bit of leave at the end of that, and I took her back to Scotland. She met my mum and dad, and then she went back over to America, and I guess we wrote, or at least she wrote, every day for a year, convinced me. And so anyway, I came over, and anyway, Nancy went on to be a professional librarian and ran the libraries here in the town and county and so forth. And we've been married 47, going on 48 years.
Wow, well done.
Thank you.
Excellent. And does that all that work with selling and running your own business, has that left you time for any other hobbies or interests other than burns?
Oh, hi. I was always a big sportsman, you know. So, I mean, I played rugby on Saturday and football on Sundays for, oh God, up well into my 40s, actually, until I ended up, I've had both my knees replaced now, so there's not much of that goes on. But yeah, rugby and football were my two games. And then, funnily enough, Douglas, when I come over here, I get hooked into all these Scottish Highland games. Now, I'm from Ayrshire. I'm from Ayrshire. What do I know about Highland Games? But anyway, they had this big Highland Games near here down in Western North Carolina called Grandfather Mountain. So I went down there, this is in the 70s, and And I watched all these people prancing around with their kilts on, and I said, "Oh hell, I can do this, you know. I'll have a go at this." So I watched them. The first year, I tried to do it all: tossing the caber, tossing the sheaf, Highland wrestling, and I realised I couldn't do them all, but I could do the wrestling. So I had sent back home to my mum and dad. I said, "Dad, send me out my old army kilt." Well, it wasn't my army kilt, it was a Boy Scout kilt, actually. So they sent me out this kilt, and of course, I couldn't get it halfway around me by this time. Anyway, I started taking part in Highland Games and did a lot of wrestling and did quite well in that for a number of years. And then I finally gave that up when I was wrestling the sons of boys whose fathers I used to wrestle. So it was time for that quit.
So what scout group were you in Kilmarnock?
You know, I want to say it was the 95th. There was Portland Road. I don't know if they're still there or not.
I couldn't tell you. I used to be scout leader at Cumnock, but I've kind of, as I've grown older, I've lost touch. Although one of the members of our Zoom group, Ian Burgoyne, is the scout leader at New Cumnock, so he keeps us in touch with what's happening in the scouting world.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the scouts were very. I mean, I was only in them probably 3 or 4 years. I didn't do the Cubs or anything. I went straight into the scouts, but. Yeah, no, it was a good troop, and it probably continued in me wanting to go into the army as well, I suppose. You know, I had always been, you know, into the outdoors, and, you know, the army was just a continuation of it as a boy. It was adventure training and great stuff, you know. It wasn't for everybody, but it was good for me.
Good. And last question before I hand you over to Jim, where did you find the rugby team in the States to play for?
Oh, well, when I come over, I played at Florida State. You know, it was big in the universities in the early 70s, late 60s. And in fact, to get to play for them, I had to sign up. You know, I had to be taking a class at Florida State University. So I took a class. I took a class in Tai Chi, if you know what that is, that made me eligible to play. Anyway, moved up here to Virginia, and there were tons of club rugby clubs. I'm still very involved with a club here. I was president of it for years and treasurer for years, and you know how that is. So we still have a very active old boys. You know, we go out and play golf and tell lies about how good we all were. You know, back in the day.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks for that, Les. I'll pass over to Jim, and Jim will maybe get you chatting about your interest in burns. Okay, Jim.
Thanks, Douglas. Well, Les, I mean, the first question is really simple. How did you get started with burns?
How do you get started? Well, I suppose you can't be born in Ayrshire and not be introduced to burns at the earliest of ages. And my father, of course, was a great man for burns and quoted him extensively, and he was always full of the anecdotes as well. And as I got older myself and learned more about Robert Burns, I realised a lot of the stories he was telling me weren't quite right. You know, they were the kind of stories that you might have heard that after a few drinks. My mother was an actress, and she was very keen that if I was going to learn poetry, I had to learn it, you know, just exactly right. And so, you know, I remember the time when everybody comes home, you know, you've got to learn to a mouse or to a louse or something for school. And I remember my mother just wearing me to death to get the correct enunciation and pronunciation and all the rest of it. And of course, this was a time in Scotland in the early 50s where you weren't allowed to have a nice Scottish accent. You remember they used to try and knock that out of you at school. And of course, my mother had the same idea. She wasn't much for having a broad Scots accent. Now I'd go out the door with my father to the football, and I'd look at him. I said, "Oh, I recognise that." So anyway, that would be my first introduction to burns, learning it in school, being exposed by my father. Funnily enough, I have no memory of schools competition. As important as that is to the federation, I have no memory of schools competition when I was coming up through the grammar school. Maybe it was there, but I didn't get exposed to it. And then, of course, going off into the army at 15, you know, Burns wasn't always forced right out in front of me. You know, it wasn't a Scottish regiment. You know, maybe if I'd, as I said, if I'd gone into a Scottish regiment, they would have had Burns nights, but that never happened. So it really wasn't until I got out of the army and came to America that I started developing more of an interest or a love of Burns. As I said, my father had always given me a love for Burns, and I had started reading on my own. And then, by doing a lot of Scottish games, people said, "Oh, you must know about Robert Burns, and you do recite this and recite that." And I don't know, one thing just led to another. That, you know, then you fall into doing Burns night dinners and stuff for these Scottish societies and so forth. Thanks.
It must be an interesting thing in America going to what we would call a Burns supper. I mean, I know there's all different titles for them depending where you are in the North American continent. How do you go on going to them?
Well, here's the thing, Jim. I have never been to a club Burns supper in Scotland. Never. And I had never been to a Burns night dinner of any kind when I went to the first one here in America, where I was doing the Immortal Memory and I was doing the haggis as well, now I think about it, and stuff. And I had never been at a Burns night. So I had nothing to kind of base what was going on. All I had was a fairly good understanding of Robert Burns and a good knowledge of Robert Burns. But honestly, I had never heard anybody else give an Immortal Memory. So I just wrote my own. And as it turned out, I ended up writing a new Immortal Memory every year. I think I've written 40 of them. I didn't know you could use the same one and just polish it and tune it up. Because, but to answer your question there, Jim, yeah, they're very, very different, because there's not many actual Burns clubs per se in North America. What there are a lot of are these Scottish societies, and their big event of the year is putting on a Burns night dinner on January the 25th, or as close as possible to it. So, you know, a lot of them have no idea about Robert Burns, and that was always, to me, the greatest of opportunities. So I could get in there and I could start telling them about them and generate people's interest in Burns. And there was nothing more enjoyable to me than, after I'd given an Immortal Memory, when somebody walks up to me and said, "Man, that was great. I'm going to go home and I'm going to get that book and I'm going to open that and I'm going to read it and da da da." So that's where my greatest pleasure in Burns comes from, is introducing people to Burns. I don't do a lot of just strictly Burns nights on January 25th, because unfortunately clubs are so far apart here. They all tend to want it on the same Friday or Saturday, right on January 25th. So if I do 2 or 3 Burns nights a year, that's probably about average. But I also give a lot of talks throughout the year to different groups, whether it's women's book clubs or library clubs or English-speaking unions, or anybody that calls me, I'll come and talk to them about Robert Burns, because I'm passionate about him and I want people to know a little bit more about him.
That's great. I mean, I've heard you reciting at the Burns Conference, and I was just wondering if you would like to give us a wee line or two, or something that you really enjoy.
You know, I do. Yeah, like most anybody. I mean, you know, you've got all the old "To a Mouse, to a Louse," and "Epistle to a Young Friend" is always a favourite. And I do "Holy Willie," although I think I'm a wee bit tired of doing "Holy Willie," getting a wee bit too dramatic and getting carried away with myself. So I'll have to cut back on that. But by far, if somebody asked me what's your favourite Burns poem, without a doubt, it would have to be "A Poet's Welcome to His Love-Begotten Daughter." And I know a lot of people do it, but to me, it's the most intimate poem that Robert Burns ever wrote. I mean, if you think about it, the size of the family, all the brothers, the sisters, the mother, the father, he rarely mentioned them at all. But here he's talking about his firstborn child. Now, I know a lot of people look at it different ways and say, oh, well, he was rebelling against this, that, and, you know, that he was an illegitimate child and he's proud of it. I just see just the whole beauty of him, just been so excited that he was a father for that first time. I don't see him that he's really trying to make that statement. But anyway, that would be my very favourite poem that I love to do. And if you want a couple of verses or the whole thing, I'll be glad to do it. Whatever you want, Jim.
Well, the whole thing's not that long, so why not go for it?
Thou's welcome wine, Miss Shanter for thee. If thoughts of thee or yet thy mammy should ever daunt me or awe me, my sweet wee lady, or if I should blush when thou should call me tighty or daddy, though now they call me fornicator and tease my name and country clater. Ach, the mere they talk, I'm ken the better, ere and let them clash, an old wife's tongue is feckless matter to gie and fash. Welcome, my bonny sweet wee daughter. Though you've come here a wee unsoaked, for I know you're coming, I have folk for both kirk and queer, yet by my faith, you're no unroch, for a that I shall swear. Wee image of my bonny Betty is near and dear, my heart I set thee, and faithfully I'd love and dot thee with his right good will, as all the priests had seen me get thee that's out of hell. Sweet fruit and money a merry dint, my funny toils no what tint, and though you come to the world a splint which fools me scoff at, and my last plaque thy peart be in it, the better half o' it. Though I should be the world bestead, I'll be as braw and beanly clad, and thy young years as nicely bred with education as ony brat o' wedlock's bed in all thy station. Lord grant that they may aye inherit thy mother's looks and graceful merit, and thy poor worthless daddy's spirit, without his failings, would please me mair to see thee air it than stoke it mailings. And if I'd be what I would hae thee and tak the counsel that I would gie thee, I'll ne'er rue the trouble wi' thee, the cost, nor the shame o' it, but be a loving father to thee and brag the name o' it.
Well done, Les.
Thank you.
Well done.
Oh, that was excellent, Les.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. It's just a favourite poem, you know. It's one you always kind of have there. The other one I like to do, of course, is Epistle to a Young Friend, and that's mostly because over here, when you're doing poetry, you can't just go out there and do Death and Dr. Hornbrook, and people going, you know, get no idea what's going on. You have to do a lot of preamble with any poetry. At least I find I have to do, you know, a good preamble before a poem, give people some idea of what it is they're about to hear, even though they're going to hear it in fairly broad Scots. So I'm I'm picky with the poems that I do in front of groups over here. And of course, Epistle to a Young Friend is fairly broad English, so to speak. I mean, it's understandable. And of course, you can always do To a Mouse and explain to the people, you know, he starts out in Scots, then the next verse is English, and you know, they pick it up I find people pick it up quite quickly if you've given them a taste of what to expect, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think Epistle to a Young Friend would be a great one for us to finish off with when we finish this episode. But before we move on to that, I was interested in you talking about you're doing talks and the fact that people are interested in you talking about Burns. Are there any heroes in the Burns story that you would have particular interest in or have done any particular research into?
You know, I wouldn't say there's any heroes. I mean, in the Burns story, I tell you where my interest in Burns lies is in we're living right now in the greatest time of Burns research. You know, it used to be like I said, I've read a lot and I have a fairly substantial library, and I became a collector, and I've got a good Burns library and so forth. And I read a lot of the early biographies, and then, you know, when they started changing in the early 20th century with Delancey Ferguson, Franklin Bliss, Snyder. People's opinion of Burns started to change a wee bit. We'd gone from this idolatry of idolising Robert Burns to all say, okay, let's take a look at the warts and all, you know, when Catherine Carswell come out with her biography and stuff. And that was in the first half of the 20th century. Now, you know, of course, we're in the 21st century now, but the second half of the 20th century, the research was amazing. There's so many good Burns scholars out there, and they're looking at every aspect of Burns. You know, I was just listening. I met Moira Hansen. She's a wee researcher at Glasgow University. I met her in, maybe it was in Irvine, and she just did this paper on Burns and bipolar and how connecting the different periods in his life to the type of writing that he was doing. Was he on a high? Was he on a low? And how it correlated to, I mean, there's just so much interesting stuff going on out there that I find it fascinating. Every new biography or every new book that comes out, I'm reading it. I don't always understand it. Don't get me wrong. And you probably haven't formed a wrong opinion anyway. I'm no academic, but there's a lot of stuff out there that makes it so worthwhile. And we're fortunate now that we've got academics and the federation club people much, much closer together than they ever will. You know, years ago, I used to always go over to Glasgow to attend these Burns conferences, not federation conferences, but academic conferences put on at Strathclyde University by Ken Simpson and so forth. You know, and I'd sit up there and I'd take in all these different lectures and find it fascinating. And I'll tell you this one wee story, and if I'm boring, you can cut it out, I don't know. And it was the last lecture of the day, and we're in this big lecture hall, and this well-known Burns speaker, Burns academic, and I'll not say his name, got up and he started to talk, and about 3 or 4 people in the audience got up and got their stuff together, put their coats on, and had to leave, right? Now, I don't know, maybe they were going to catch a bus or something, had to go home. But this academic said, okay, well, that's the federation people gone. Now we can get on to the serious stuff. Oh, you know, and to my shame to this day, Douglas, I never stood up and made a comment to that.
Yeah.
But it aggravated the hell out of me that there was that division. But I truly believe now, thanks to the likes of people like Jerry Cruthers and Ross Roy and Patrick Scott and Murray Pittett, it's much, much narrower, that academics go hand in hand with what's happening with club members. People like Bill Dawson running the Chronicle now, it's become a much more academic thing. There's a much closer thing there. Anyway, I've got off my wee horse.
No, I think you're right. And I think there's an amazing number of Burns scholars in the clubs who are looking at Burns not necessarily from an academic perspective, but are looking into Burns in a great deal of depth, but presenting it in a way in which other people in clubs can understand it.
Absolutely. And it should be that way, you know. I mean, there shouldn't be this separation between the two. I mentioned to you earlier in the talk, you know, one of my great regrets, it's not a regret, but it's just a fact of life, that I've never been to a Burns Club meeting in Scotland. I've never been to a regular club Burns night dinner. I would love to go to one. I mean, I've been at Burns, I've been over to the annual general conference in Scotland a dozen times or whatever. So, you know, I have that side of it, but I would love to experience, you know, one of these kind of club dinners and just kind of get a feel for it, and here's some of the wonderful readers and reciters that you've got, and here's some of the immortal memories. I rarely get to hear an immortal memory because I'm the one that's doing the immortal memory, you know.
Well, when things get back to normal, if you manage to get over here around the time of our new Covenant Burns supper, you'd be very welcome to join us.
Well, thank you, Douglas. I wasn't fishing, but thank you.
Jim, I'd be keen to find out from Les how you get involved in helping organise and run the the burn scene in North America, and then about his involvement with the Federation.
Yeah, well, he's, as I say, I've met Les several times at Burns conferences, and he's a good company. How did you start with Ubana?
Good, yeah, fair enough. I think I mentioned to you that I had joined Federation as an individual member sometime in the 90s, and I was back in Kilmarnock, and I popped into the deck and was talking to the girls there, and it might have been Shirley Bell at that time, I'm not sure, but she said, "Oh, you need to get in touch with these people in North America called NAFB." NAFB, what a mouthful that was. It was North American Federated Burnsians. Anyway, and Jim Connor and Elma Connor were sort of heading that up along with May and Alec Crawley and so forth. And you remember Jim Connor? Jim was a past World Federation president from Canada. So anyway, I gave him a call, and I spoke to Jim. He said, "Oh, absolutely, come up. We're having the conference this coming whenever it was." I went, "Okay." So my wife and I, Nancy and I, drive up to Canada, about 15-hour drive to get there and go to this conference, and immediately felt at home. It was the most magic thing. Now you have to remember, this was a lot of these Burns clubs in Canada were made up of these expats, these Scots who had come over in the 50s and the early 60s and formed strong nucleus clubs of expats. Now, I'll never forget that night, the first night coming back to my hotel room and waking Nancy up. She hadn't come to the after-hour party, but I had. I said, "Nancy," she goes, "What?" I said, "I've just been in a time warp." She goes, "What?" I'd gone to this, hotel room, and there's, probably 15 of us crammed in there sitting on the bed, and nearly every one of them were Scottish, and they were all from probably the part of Scotland I'm from. They were telling Pat Mickens stick jokes from the 1950s. They were singing the same wee silly songs that we were doing. My father was singing when I left Scotland in the 50s. And they had carried this on. And that's why those clubs were so tight. There were Scots people who wanted to stay together and stuff. So anyway, it was a wonderful welcome. And I immediately fell in with these people, and I've never missed a conference since, I don't think, no matter where they are, all over Canada or the United States. Anyway, you'd ask me how did I get involved in it. Well, you know how these things are. The willing horse or the new person immediately gets grabbed, and so they asked me if I'd be a US director for NAFB, which went on to become Ubana. And I immediately said, "Well, listen, I'm not a club man. I don't have a club. I don't represent MD. I'm just representing myself." They said, no, it'd be great. We'll get you involved. So anyway, did that, and I stayed as a US director of Ubana for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years, making it quite clear that I had no interest in being anything but a USA director. At that time, the strength of Ubana was certainly in Eastern Canada. And now it's switched a wee bit, and more of our strength is coming out of Calgary and Medicine Hat and Winnipeg. Those clubs are a little stronger, younger, more vibrant, and so forth. Obviously, the same problems you have in Scotland with aging out. I think it's a little bit more severe in our part of the world up here in Canada. Down here in the United States, where I am, we have a few clubs, but they're not particularly strong clubs. There are some strong clubs like Atlanta, very, very strong club. But a lot of them, are just get together maybe twice a year and so forth. So I'm a great believer the strength in the Burns Federation is going to lie in individual membership. I really feel strong about that. Jim, getting back to answer your question, so how did I get involved in it? Well, that was how I first got involved with that. And then, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years ago, when Jim Shield, I guess, was president of the Federation, Mac Irvin had been US director of the Federation for about 10 years. And they approached me and said, "Would you be willing to take on the position of USA director for the Federation?" And I immediately said, what? I said, again, I have no representative. I'm not representing a club, but, you know, and I took a long time to think about that one and discussed it and decided, well, if there's something I can bring to the federation and offer support, then I'd be willing to take it on. So that's how I got into that side of being with the federation as the USA director. And things are, as you now know, because of Zoom and virtual meetings, I'm feeling much more involved with decision making and being aware of the direction that the federation's going.
Very good. The other wee snippet I read about, I was doing a wee bit of research, and is it the Tatler, your kind of in-house magazine for Ubana? It's called
The Tatler, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I noticed that you're a recent winner of the Ubana Quiz.
Thank you. Yeah, I've won that a number of years. I'm lucky to have it because it was a COVID year last year, so we never got to compete for it again. So I've got it for an extra year. But yeah, I've got my name on that about 8 or 9. I can't remember how many times on it. The Jim Connor Memorial Quiz. I don't win it as often as Ronnie O'Byrne wins the golf trophy, but there you go. Yeah.
Very good. Jim, is there anything else that we want to ask Les before we get him to do another wee recitation?
No, but I'm looking forward to having heard them doing this of an evening at the after-do party, I might add. I'm really looking forward to it because it's a smashing recitation of the poem.
Well, maybe I can help with my youthful good looks. Maybe you could think of me as Andrew Aitken when you're delivering this poem.
Well, you know, I tell you, Douglas, it's funny because because it's a poem that everybody knows, particularly when you're speaking to a group of Burnsians, epistle to a young friend. I've heard that how many times. This just came out of the blue to me at a conference, and again, I think it was in Peebles. I was sitting with I don't know who I was sitting with, Peter Hughes, and anyway, I get called, shouted up to do something. I'm going, oh God, what am I going to do? I hadn't even thought about doing anything. And I decided to do epistle to a young friend in a wee bit different way. I did it as if Robert Burns was actually out for a walk with young Andrew Aitken. And I did it as a 2-part thing. I just made the stuff up. I still make it up. I've never written anything down. I just go along with that. But before I give you a couple of verses, and I'll not do all of it because you've got plenty of other stuff to do, but I mentioned to you my father was a great Burns man, great man for quoting and so forth. And if I didn't hear the quote, I free half hand your story tell when we a bosom crony, but I keep some it yourself, you'd scarcely tell to ony. I must have heard it every week. And I tell you, I kind of live by that, actually. It's a very good quote. Every verse in this poem is just a gem. Every verse is a nugget that you can take with you. I mean, that whole one, the sacred lower we'll place love, luxuriantly indulge it, but never tempt the illicit rove, though nothing should divulge it. For leave the quantum of the sins, the hazard of concealing, but it hardens all we in and petrifies the feeling. Such a great, great poem. When I was a boy, I just moved out to America. My father had been out for a walk one day. He used to, great man for going for a walk. So he'd walked down to Irvine and had gone to Wellwood, and he had bought this wee cassette tape done in the 1970 by Irvine Burns Club. And it was all these old worthies, I'm sure most of them are dead now, doing recitations. And I still have that cassette to this day. I've converted it onto CDs so as I wouldn't lose it. But that particular cassette just was so important to me. And it helped me in keeping my language alive too. A lot of people say, you've been out in America for 40 some years, you still sound Scottish. I said, well, that's just the way it was. I was 22 by the time I got out here. But I give thanks to Robert Burns for keeping my language and my accent alive. You know, just because I read Burns all the time and I read it out loud all the time. I think my wife thinks I'm mental. Anyway, I'm blathering on. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. And I think we've got time for the whole poem if you don't mind doing it.
Okay. Let me see. I'll try and do it somewhat like I used to do. I'm not standing up. I'll start it out something like this. Hello, Mr. Burns. My father said you want to have a walk and a talk with me. Well, along he thought my youthful friend a summit to assent you, that would serve no other end than just a kind of mental, but who the subject theme may gang, like time and chance determine. Perhaps it may turn out a song, perhaps turn out a sermon. Oh, that sounds awful interesting, Mr. Burns. Oh, we'll see what this is all about then, eh? You'll try the world soon, my lad, and Andrew, dear, believe me, you'll find mankind an Inca squad, and muckle they may grieve you. For care and trouble set your thought, even when your ends are tained, nor your views may come to naught, where every nerve is strained. I'll no say men are villains all the real hard and wicked way, nae check, but human law are too a few restricted, but oh, mankind, they're Inca weak and little to be trusted, and if self the wavering balance shake, it's rarely right adjusted. God almighty, Mr. Burns, you make it sound like there's a pack of them out there. Is everybody that bad? Yet they who fall in fortune strife, their fate we shouldn't censure, for still the important end of life they equally may answer. A man may hear known his hurt, yet poor to thoroughly stare him. A man may take his neighbour's pert, yet have nae cash to spare him. Oh, well, that's given me a lot to think about, Mr. Burns, for God. Anyway, I've got a bunch of good pals, and well, I'll be all right. I don't think I'll fall by the roadside. You know what I mean? I free hand your story tell when we a bosom crony, but still keep something to yourself that you would scarcely tell to ony. Conceal yourself as well as you can for critical dissection, and keep through every other man with sharpened sly inspection. Whew, by Jove. All right, I'll give some thought to that. But Mr. Burns, can I ask you a question? My father says you're a great man for the lassies, and I've got a couple going myself. Oh, he says, son, the sacred law a wheel place love, luxuriantly indulge it, but never tempt the illicit rove, and nothing should divulge it. For a wave the quantum of the sins, the hazard of concealing, but oh, it hardens all we in and it petrifies the feeling. Oh, well, you certainly have put me straight on the fact with the women then, eh? But anyway, I'm about to make my fortune. I can't wait to get away from here. Oh, aye, seek Dame Fortune's golden smile and assiduous wait upon her, and gather gear but every while that's justified by owner. No for to hide it in a hedge or for a train attendant, but for that glorious privilege of being independent. Oh, aye, I see what you're talking about there, Mr. Burns. Right enough, yeah. Being independent, that's why we should work. It's not just to get money and show it off. I think I understand that. Well, anyway, I'm a young man. I've got no much to worry about. Well, when rant and ruin and pleasures ring, religion may be little blinded, or if it gives a random sting, it may be little minded. But when on life you're tempest driven, and conscience is but a canker, then a correspondence fixed in heaven is sure a noble anchor. Oh, aye, I'll no forget the good book. I'll no forget the way I was brought up. You've given me some great stuff to think about, Mr. Burns, and I thank you for the time. Well, adieu, dear amiable youth. Your heart can ne'er be wanting. May pleasure, may fortitude and truth erect your brow undaunting. And in ploughman's phrase, God send you speed still daily to grow wiser. And may you better wreck the reed than e'er did the adviser. Sorry, Douglas, I got a wee bit off kilter there. I wasn't planning on doing that, so I hadn't read it in a while, you know.
No, that's all right. And that's no problem at all. So that was great, Les. Thank you very much for your time. That was fantastic, and it was great, great to hear about your life with Robert Burns. So thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you, Douglas, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jim. Take care.